Rowan Ashfield was 42 years old, and the kind of man who believed that the most important things in life were rarely the loudest ones. He ran a mid-sized architectural firm out of Ottawa, the kind of firm that didn't chase flashy commercial contracts, but spent years earning the trust of municipalities and school boards across Ontario. He was known in his office for arriving before anyone else and leaving after the cleaners. Not because he was chasing something, because building things carefully, methodically, from the foundation up, was simply the only way he knew how to live. He coached his 8-year-old daughter Nora's hockey team on Saturday mornings in a cold arena on the west end of the city. Standing at the boards in his toque and thermos of black coffee, calling patient corrections week after week until the kids stopped skating into each other. He made her lunch every morning before school, a peanut butter sandwich cut on a diagonal because that was the only way she would eat it, and a little handwritten note tucked beside it that she claimed to be too old for but never threw away. He drove his mother-in-law to her Thursday afternoon physiotherapy appointments, even though it added 40 minutes to his day, and she never once thanked him for it. He was the kind of man who fixed things without being asked, who noticed when the conversation at a dinner table had gone tense and quietly changed the subject before anyone could get hurt, who drove slower in school zones than the posted limit because he had decided years ago that the 12 extra seconds simply wasn't worth arguing about. His grandmother had grown up in rural Nova Scotia and used to say, while folding dish towels at the kitchen table, that a man's character is measured not by his best days, but by what he does on the ones when nobody's watching. Rowan had taken that to heart a long time ago. Then, on a Thursday evening in late November, the kind of cold, still night when the first real snow of the season had just settled over Ottawa, and the city was doing that particular thing it does where everything goes quiet, and the streetlights make the air look like it's full of glass. His wife of 11 years slid a manila envelope across the kitchen island between them, while Nora slept upstairs, and smiled the smile of a woman who believed she had already won. She hadn't, because what Silvana Ashfield did not know, what she had not troubled herself to account for, was that Rowan had spent the previous 7 months constructing something she had never seen coming. Something exact. Something patient. Something entirely invisible to her until the moment she chose to set it all in motion. By the time she finished that smile, the architecture was already complete. But to understand what was inside that envelope and what was already waiting on the other side of it, we need to go back. Back to a Sunday afternoon in April. Back to a routine visit to the walk-in clinic on Merivale Road and a sentence from a physician that cracked Rowan's understanding of his own life open at the seams. Nora had developed a low-grade fever that had dragged on for 5 days. Not alarming, but persistent enough that Rowan wanted it looked at properly. Silvana was in Montreal for the weekend for what she described as a work retreat. Rowan signed the intake form, sat with Nora in the waiting room while she colored a page from the booklet the receptionist handed out, and then followed the physician into the small examination room when she was called. The physician was a careful woman, unhurried in her manner. She reviewed Nora's chart for a long moment and then looked up. She said she needed to ask Rowan a clarifying question before they discussed the blood work. "Could you tell me your blood type?" he told her. "O negative, same as his wife." The physician nodded slowly and looked back at the chart. "Nora's results show AB positive. That particular combination isn't genetically possible from 2 O negative parents. I'm not here to tell you what that means for your family, but I did want to make sure you had the information." Rowan thanked her. He kept his voice level the whole time. He gathered Nora's jacket from the chair, helped her with her mittens in the corridor, and walked out to the car. He drove 15 minutes before he pulled over. A quiet residential street in Barhaven, beside a small city park with a snow-dusted play structure that no one was using. He put the car in park. He turned off the radio. He sat with both hands on the steering wheel until his knuckles were pale, and then he exhaled very slowly through his nose and looked out the windshield at nothing in particular. He did not call anyone. He did not send a message. He did not permit himself to react in a way he couldn't take back. In the back seat, Nora had fallen asleep against her car seat with her mitten on the wrong hand and her chin tucked against her chest. He looked at her for a long time in the rearview mirror. Then he drove them home. That night, long after Nora was in bed, Rowan sat at his drafting table in the study with the door closed and the desk lamp the only light in the room. He had a blank page in front of him, the kind he used when he was starting a new project from nothing. He sat there for a while without writing anything. Then, in the same precise hand he used for sight notes, he wrote 3 words at the top of the page. "What do I know?" And he began. The following week, he made an appointment with a private family law solicitor named Harrington, a woman with a quiet practice on Elgin Street that several colleagues had mentioned over the years in the context of complicated matters handled with discretion. He logged the appointment on his work calendar under a fictitious client meeting. He arrived 5 minutes early. He left with a clear understanding of exactly what the law in Ontario permitted him to do and exactly what it required. He ordered a private DNA test, the kit delivered to his office, the results directed to a secure email address he created for the purpose. He used Nora's hairbrush and his own, items that existed already, asked no questions, and could not be anticipated. He began the careful, methodical work of documenting the financial landscape of their marriage, not with urgency. With the same measured precision he brought to a structural assessment. He reviewed 7 years of joint account statements. He cross-referenced Silvana's business expenses against her calendar. He noted discrepancies, not dramatic ones, but the kind that accumulate meaning over time, the way hairline cracks in a foundation reveal themselves only to someone who knows exactly where to look. At home, nothing changed in the visible layer of things. He still made dinner on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He still sat beside her on the couch on weekend evenings. He still drove Nora to hockey on Saturday mornings and stood at the boards with his coffee and his patient corrections. The household operated on its ordinary rhythms, and nothing in his manner invited curiosity. One evening in May, Silvana glanced up from her laptop and asked, with the mild, incurious tone of a person asking out of habit rather than interest, whether he'd been unusually busy with the firm. He said there was a school project in Canada that had hit some approval delays and was taking more of his attention than expected. She nodded and went back to her screen. He was already 3 steps ahead. The second significant development arrived in June on a Saturday morning, while Nora was at a birthday party and the house was empty. His phone rang, an unknown number, which he almost let go to voicemail. He answered. It was someone he hadn't expected to hear from. Silvana's older brother, Tremblay, a man who had worked in commercial real estate in Gatineau for the better part of 20 years and had always maintained a careful, cordial distance from his sister's marriage without ever explaining why. His voice on the phone was composed but low in the way of a person who had been deciding whether to make this call for a long time and had finally run out of reasons not to. "I need to meet with you," Tremblay said, "somewhere that isn't close to either of our neighborhoods." They met the following Tuesday at a diner off the highway near Manotick. Tremblay was already there when Rowan arrived, sitting at a corner booth with a coffee he'd barely touched and a look on his face that Rowan recognized, the particular expression of a man who is about to say something that cannot be unsaid. He slid his phone across the table without preamble. It was a series of messages, private, clearly documented. His sister's name on one side of the conversation, a man named Bertrand on the other. The timestamps spanned 14 months. There were messages about timing, about valuation, about the right moment to move. One message near the end of the thread read, "The house and the equity in the firm are the real targets. Give it until after the Canada project closes. That's when his leverage is highest. That's when we move. Rowan read the thread once. He set the phone face down on the table with the careful deliberateness of a man who understands that how he responds in the next 60 seconds will determine a great deal about how the following year unfolds. "How long have you known about this?" he said. Tremblay looked at the table. "Long enough that I should have come to you sooner. I'm sorry, Rowan. I want you to know I tried to talk her out of it. I know you did." A silence that lasted several seconds. "Thank you for coming," Rowan said. He meant it completely. From that point forward, Tremblay became the one person on Sylvana's side of the family that Rowan trusted without reservation. He didn't ask Tremblay to do anything uncomfortable. Tremblay volunteered. He attended 2 family dinners over the following months, and, on each occasion, forwarded Rowan a summary of anything relevant that Sylvana had said in unguarded moments. He documented a phone call he overheard in September, in which Sylvana discussed the firm's equity position with someone who was not her financial advisor. He preserved the record and sent it to Harrington's office. Through all of it, Rowan remained exactly the father Nora needed him to be. He never missed a hockey practice. He read to her every night, long books, all the way to the end of the chapter, even when she was half asleep before the climax. He taught her how to check the oil in the car because he told her, knowing how things work is never wasted knowledge. He helped her build a model of the Parliament buildings out of popsicle sticks for her school project and let her paint it the wrong color and said nothing because it was hers. One November evening, after a bath, sitting on the edge of her bed in the low light, with her hair damp against her shoulders, she asked him what the word resilient meant. He thought about it for a moment before he answered. "It means that when something bends you, you don't stay bent," he said. "You find your shape again." She considered this with the serious expression of an 8-year-old who is deciding whether the answer is satisfactory. "Like a hockey stick," she finally said. "Exactly like a hockey stick." She seemed satisfied with this and pulled her blanket up and asked him to read the next chapter. He read 3. On the nights when Nora was asleep and the house was quiet, Rowan sat at his drafting table past midnight, reviewing documentation with Harrington over encrypted correspondence, refining the legal strategy in the same incremental, precise way he refined a building plan, not with anger, not with the kind of urgency that comes from hurt, with the steady, long-horizon patience of someone who has decided that getting it right matters more than getting it done quickly. He had already filed a precautionary caveat on the firm's equity position through Harrington's office, protecting it from any claim arising from the marriage. He had organized 7 years of business records into clean, date-stamped documentation that would be immediately legible to a court. He had the message thread from Tremblay, properly preserved and admissible. He had one more thing. A conversation, recorded on his phone during a dinner in October when Sylvana, believing she was speaking privately to her friend on the back deck, had said, clearly and without ambiguity, "He's going to be blindsided. He has no idea what I've been planning. By the time he figures it out, the filing will already be done." Harrington had called that recording the clearest evidence of premeditated matrimonial fraud she had seen in 14 years of family law practice. By the time November arrived, everything was in place. The filing was done. The documentation was organized. Harrington was on standby. And then, on that cold Thursday evening when the snow had just come down and Nora was asleep upstairs, Sylvana slid the manila envelope across the kitchen island with the calm, satisfied expression of a woman who believed that what was inside it was going to determine the next chapter of both their lives. She was right about that part, at least. Rowan picked up the envelope. He turned it over once. There was nothing in his expression that suggested urgency or dread, only the particular stillness of a man who has already read the outcome and is now simply watching the scene unfold toward it. He opened it. A demand letter from her solicitor, a list of claims, the matrimonial home, 50% of the firm's assessed value. Spousal support calculated over 7 years. He read it through to the end. Then he folded it along its original crease and set it flat on the island in front of him. He looked up at Silvana. "Check your email," he said. His voice was level, not cruel, not raised. The way a winter road is level, flat and clear, and offering no purchase for anything that tries to slide. Check it now, because what's in there is going to change everything you think you know about how this conversation ends. She picked up her phone with the comfortable unhurriedness of someone expecting confirmation rather than news. She opened her email. She read the first line of the message from Harrington's office. The unhurriedness stopped. Her face changed, not gradually, not in stages, but all at once, the way a structure changes when the load-bearing element fails. Everything that had been composed and certain and rehearsed simply gave way. Her hand, the one holding the phone, began to shake. Not a small tremor. The sustained, traveling kind that moves from the fingers to the wrist and doesn't stop. The email contained everything. A petition for divorce, filed in the Ontario Superior Court of Justice 3 days prior. Harrington's name on the letterhead. A 7-year financial timeline, cross-referenced and annotated, documenting the pattern of fund diversion from the joint accounts into a private holding structure Rowan had identified 4 months ago and traced in complete detail. The message thread from Tremblay's phone. His sister's own words, "The house and the equity in the firm are the real targets. Give it until after the Kannada project closes." The October recording. Her voice on the back deck, speaking to her friend. "He has no idea what I've been planning. By the time he figures it out, the filing will already be done." And at the bottom, a single paragraph from Harrington. A motion for primary residential custody of Nora Ashfield had been filed that morning, supported by the full documentation package. A hearing date had been set. Rowan stood up from the island. No raised voice, no trembling, no reaching for anything that would make the moment feel more dramatic than it already was. "I've known for 7 months," he said. "You believed you were several steps ahead of me. The thing infirms otherwise. Tonight, in this kitchen, you presented your intentions without knowing that this room already contained everything I needed." He picked up his phone. He put on his jacket, which was hanging over the back of the chair. He walked down the hall toward the front door. "Nora is asleep," he said without turning around. "She has hockey tomorrow at 8. Don't wake her up tonight." The front door closed behind him. Not slammed, not dramatic, just closed. The soft, definitive sound of something that has completed what it was there to do. Outside, the snow was still coming down, light and unhurried. The street was empty. The kind of Ottawa night that is so quiet it almost rings. The streetlights threw long, clean lines across the white, and somewhere on the block a neighbor's outdoor light had a timer that had clearly been set wrong and was still burning orange in the middle of the night. Rowan walked to his car. He sat inside for a moment without starting it. His hands were still, not gripping, not braced. Simply resting in his lap, he called Harrington. "It's done," he said. She presented the demand letter in writing, in the house, on the record. She didn't know about the filing. Harrington paused for exactly 1 second. The timing is perfect. Did the recording capture the conversation? Every word. Then we're in the best possible position. Get some rest. The preliminary hearing is in 9 days. He spent the night at a friend's house. A fellow architect named Sinclair, who had gone through his own divorce 6 years ago and who understood, without needing it explained, that Rowan didn't want to talk about it, only to not be alone in an unfamiliar silence. Sinclair made tea, and they watched half a hockey game and went to bed at a reasonable hour, which was exactly what Rowan needed. Back at the house on Lichen Crescent, the evening after Rowan left was not quiet. Silvana called her solicitor 3 times before 10 o'clock. The conversations, according to what Tremblay heard secondhand in the days that followed, were not reassuring. The solicitor delivered the news that Rowan had filed first, that the financial documentation predated her demand letter by months, and that a key witness had been listed for the custody proceeding whose name she had not anticipated. Tremblay's name. When she reached her brother that evening, the call lasted less than 4 minutes. Tremblay answered her questions directly and without apology. He had told her, he said. He had told her more than once that what she was planning was wrong and would cause harm to people who did not deserve it, including Nora. She hadn't listened. He was sorry for that. He was not sorry for what he'd done. The line went quiet for a long time. Then she hung up. The Ontario Superior Court of Justice on Queen Street has a particular quality on November mornings, a heaviness in the air that isn't just the stone walls or the ceiling height, but something more accumulated. The weight of a great many difficult things that have been brought into that building and sorted over many decades by people who were required to remain unimpressed by them. The judge assigned to the preliminary custody hearing was the Honorable Justice Marchand, 58 years old, nearly 3 decades on the family bench. He was a man who had seen enough deliberate complexity introduced into custody proceedings to have developed, over time, a very efficient method of identifying it and setting it aside without ceremony. He read case files, the way experienced engineers read structural reports, not looking for what was there, but for what the numbers implied about what wasn't visible on the surface. He opened the Ashfield file. He began to read. He turned pages for 11 minutes without speaking. His expression, over the course of those 11 minutes, moved through several gradations of a particular kind of still displeasure that every litigator in that courtroom had seen before and recognized immediately. Harrington presented the case with the methodical, unhurried precision that was her hallmark. She was the kind of solicitor who believed that a court's time was a finite resource that should not be wasted, and whose presentation style reflected this belief in every sentence. The financial documentation came first. 7 years of records, clean, dated, cross-referenced, a pattern of diversion from the joint accounts, not dramatic in any individual instance, but consistent and cumulative, and coordinated with the timeline of the firm's growing equity value. Then the message thread. The judge read it in its entirety without comment. Then the audio recording. The courtroom was not large. When Silvana's voice came through the speaker, clear, confident, speaking without any awareness that she was being recorded, the room went very still in the particular way that rooms go still when something that was private becomes, suddenly and irrevocably, public. He's going to be blindsided. He has no idea what I've been planning. By the time he figures it out, the filing will already be done. The court reporter's hands did not slow, but in the row of seats behind the respondent's table, a woman who had come as Silvana's support shifted almost imperceptibly in her chair. Tremblay was called to the stand. He came in from the corridor in a dark jacket, moving with the deliberate, unhurried manner of a man who has made a decision he knows is right and has accepted that it will not be comfortable. He took the oath and sat down and looked at the middle distance, not at his sister. Harrington approached. "You are the respondent's older brother. Is that correct?" "Yes. You provided documentation to the petitioner's legal counsel. In your own words, can you describe what you witnessed?" Tremblay's jaw moved once. Then he exhaled and began. He was precise and factual throughout most of it. He described what he had seen in his sister's communications over a period of more than a year. He described the conversation he had overheard in September. He described the phone call. He described the multiple occasions on which he had told his sister directly that the plan was wrong and would damage people who were blameless in the situation. Then, near the end of his testimony, his voice changed, not breaking exactly, but shifting, the way a surface shifts when the pressure beneath it has been building for a long time and finally finds a seam. "My niece calls him Dad," he said. "She has called him Dad for 8 years. She brings him the pictures she draws at school. She asks for him when she's sick. He is the only father she has ever known, and he has been there every single day, for every single thing, for every single year of her life." He paused. "She is not a financial instrument. She is an 8-year-old child, and my sister knew exactly what she was doing when she structured things the way she did. The room did not breathe. Justice Marchand set his pen down. He looked at the respondents' table for a long, quiet moment. The look of a man who has read the same story in too many different forms over too many years to have any remaining patience for the version of it designed to obscure what it actually is. When he spoke, his voice was even and final. The documentation before this court establishes a sustained and deliberate pattern in which the respondent organized her matrimonial strategy around the financial assets of a professional practice, and in which the child's residential status was used as a negotiating instrument in that strategy. The court does not take that lightly. The child's interests are not a variable in an adult's financial calculation. They are the only fixed point this court is required to protect. He paused. The court takes note that the petitioner, throughout the period in which he became aware of this situation, did not disrupt the child's daily life, did not alter the household routine in any way that would have caused her distress, and continued to function as her primary caregiver in every practical sense. That record matters. The gavel came down. Primary residential custody of Nora Ashfield was granted to Rowan, effective immediately, pending the full divorce proceeding. Silvana was granted supervised access, 2 hours per week at a court-approved location in the presence of a certified access supervisor. The claim against the firm's equity was denied in its entirety on the basis of the documented evidence of fraudulent intent, spousal support, not ordered given the documented financial diversion. The court noted that Silvana's solicitor was formally put on notice regarding her client's obligations under the existing orders. Each ruling arrived in that courtroom with the specific weight of a thing that has been carefully measured before it was placed. Not theatrical, not punitive for the sake of it, simply accurate. Silvana sat through all of it without moving. Her face had the quality of something that has had all its scaffolding removed. As the gavel fell for the last time and the room began its low, purposeful movement toward the exits, she stood. She crossed the few steps between the two tables before her solicitor could redirect her. Rowan was gathering his folder, his back half turned. He looked up when he heard his name. Her eyes were red. The composed exterior she had arrived in that morning was gone, and what remained was stripped and unguarded and, he could see this, even now, real. "I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I just need you to know that I understand what I did. I'm not saying this because of how it turned out. I'm saying it because it was wrong. What I did to you was wrong." Rowan looked at her for a long moment. Harrington, beside him, was quiet. He didn't look angry. He didn't look relieved. He looked at her the way you look at a place you once lived, with full, clear recognition and with a distance that has become permanent not through bitterness, but simply through the passage of what has happened. "I hope you find your way through this," he said, "for Nora's sake as much as anything." He picked up his folder, gave Harrington a single nod, and walked toward the doors. The afternoon outside was the kind of November afternoon that sometimes arrives in Ottawa as an apology for the months ahead, sharp and cold but brilliantly clear, the sky a high, cloudless blue that makes the city look like something newly assembled. Rowan stood on the courthouse steps for a moment and let the cold air into his lungs. Then he drove to his mother-in-law's house, his former mother-in-law. Technically, though the distinction felt premature and beside the point, where Nora had spent the day with a woman who had always loved her granddaughter considerably more than she had ever taken sides in adult disagreements. He had called her 3 days earlier and explained the situation plainly and without editorializing. She had listened to the whole thing without interrupting. Then she had said, "Bring her to me on court day. She'll be fine." And that had been the end of it. He knocked twice. The door swung open, and Nora came down the hall at the particular velocity of a child who has been in the house too long and has a lot of stored energy to deploy. She crashed into him at full speed. Did it go okay? It went exactly the way it needed to go. She pulled back and looked at him with the specific evaluative scrutiny of an 8-year-old who is assessing whether the adult in front of her is telling the truth or being diplomatic. Are you sure? I'm sure. She appeared to accept this. Grandma and I made butter tarts. How many did you eat? A reasonable number. He laughed, a real one, unguarded and warm, and pulled her back in and held her a beat longer than was strictly necessary. She tolerated this with the dignity of someone who understood its purpose. 3 months is long enough for the shape of a life to reorganize itself. Rowan found a house in Westboro, a detached 3-bedroom on a street with mature maples that would make extraordinary noise come October, and a backyard with enough room for a proper skating rink in January if the winter cooperated. He assembled Nora's room first, the weekend they moved in. A loft bed she had selected herself from a catalog with the focused intensity she brought to all important decisions, shelves that he built, slightly imperfectly, from a kit, and which leaned approximately 4 degrees from true vertical. Nora declared the lean intentional and architectural. He left it. Life found its rhythm. School drop-offs and forgotten library books, and the Saturday morning arena, and 2 thermoses of coffee, because he had started bringing one for Nora's assistant coach as well, who was always there before him, and always looked like she needed it. Dinners that Nora helped with, sometimes usefully, sometimes not, but always with the absolute conviction that her contributions were decisive. Bedtime negotiations that followed a predictable arc and always ended the same way, which was 1 chapter more than he had originally offered. The firm continued doing what it had always done. Steady, careful work. A new contract with a school board in Eastern Ontario. 3 young architects he had hired the previous year who were beginning to show the particular quality he always looked for. Not brilliance, exactly, but the willingness to do the unglamorous part of a project as carefully as the visible part. Then, in February, Silvana made a mistake. Under the terms of the access order, she was permitted supervised visits with Nora on Sunday afternoons at a family services center on Carling Avenue, in the presence of a certified access supervisor. She had attended the first 2 sessions without incident. She had missed the third, with a formal explanation submitted through her solicitor. On a Wednesday morning in February, she arrived at Nora's school. She had not given notice. She had no authorization. Her name had been flagged in the school's records with a standing restriction on unauthorized pickup. The woman at the front office, a person who had worked in that school for 16 years and who maintained her protocols with the serene, unwavering consistency of someone who understood that the protocols existed for good reasons, checked the record, excused herself politely, and called Rowan's number. He answered on the second ring. He was at his desk. He was already composing a message to Harrington before the call ended. She came to the school. Don't go there. Don't call her. Let the process handle it. Harrington filed the emergency motion within the hour. The hearing was brief. The access supervisor's incident report. The existing order. The documentation of what had occurred. Justice Marchand reviewed the materials with the expression of a man who has set out the rules of a proceeding in plain language and has watched one party decide the rules were optional. The supervised access order was revoked. Primary residential custody, already established, was confirmed as permanent. Silvana's solicitor was directed to advise his client in writing that any further unauthorized contact attempt would be treated as contempt. The matter was closed. The divorce was finalized on a Friday afternoon in late March in Harrington's office on Elgin Street. Rowan signed the last documents at a table by the window. Outside, the Rideau Canal was just beginning its slow, patient thaw, the ice going gray and soft at the edges, the way it does in the weeks before it finally lets go. Harrington shook his hand. "I've handled a great many of these," she said. "I want you to know that the way you conducted yourself through this process was not common. It was the right way." Rowan looked out the window for a moment. I had someone to protect, he said. That clarifies most things. He met someone, eventually, the way people meet people when they are not looking, at a fundraiser for a youth literacy organization that a colleague had badgered him into attending on a Thursday evening in April when he would have preferred to be home. He had stood at the edge of the room with a glass of water and the mild, resigned expression of someone who has accepted that this is where the evening has placed him. Her name was Lena. She was a pediatric occupational therapist who had strong opinions about public library funding and absolutely no patience for the automatic checkout machines at the superstore on Baseline, which she regarded as a deliberate imposition on people who simply wanted to buy groceries without solving a puzzle. She laughed without calculating at first. She asked questions and then listened to the complete answer before she said anything else. And when, several weeks later, she asked about the divorce, she let him tell the whole story at his own pace and didn't try to simplify it into something more comfortable. She met Nora on a Saturday afternoon at the Rideau River, a casual walk arranged with considerably more forethought than it appeared to require. Nora assessed her with the particular unhurried scrutiny that children deploy when they understand that something important might be at stake. After approximately 6 minutes of evaluation, Nora asked whether she knew any good books about hockey players. Lena named 2 without hesitating. Nora said that one of them was actually excellent and that the other was fine. Lena said she agreed on both counts. That was the beginning. Homes become homes the way they always have, not in a single moment, but in the accumulation of 100 small and unremarkable ones, until one Tuesday evening, while making dinner, you look around the kitchen and realize the warmth in the room isn't coming from the stove. Lena brought a plant, then 2 more, then a tall fern for the corner of the living room that Nora named without being asked, and watered with the devoted irregularity that characterized her approach to all responsibilities she had personally claimed. The fern appeared to thrive on this. It grew 3 new fronds in the first month, which Nora considered proof that her method was correct. The firm continued its patient, unhurried ascent. Rowan hired a 4th architect that autumn, a careful, quiet woman from Kingston who reminded him of himself at 29. Before he had made certain mistakes he would not recommend and learned things he wished he hadn't needed to learn. On her first day, he told her what his grandmother had told him at a kitchen table in Nova Scotia about character. He told it straight, without editorializing. She wrote it down in her notebook, which he considered an excellent sign. It was a full year after the papers were signed when Rowan encountered Silvana again. A Saturday afternoon at the Westboro Farmers Market. He was at the bread stall with Nora, who was engaged in a focused evaluation of the sourdough options with the seriousness the task deserved. He heard his name and looked up. She was thinner than he remembered and less armored, not carelessly so, but in the way of someone who has gone through something that removed the structures she had built around herself and has not yet decided what to put in their place. She was alone. A small canvas bag over one shoulder. Nora was still absorbed in the sourdough and had not looked up. "I'm not going to take up your time," Silvana said. Her voice was quiet, entirely stripped of the certainty that had once made it sound like armor. I want to say it again, outside of a room where it had to be said. What I did was wrong. Not the outcome wrong, fundamentally wrong, and you didn't deserve it." Rowan looked at her for a moment. There had been a time when this encounter would have carried a great deal of weight, when even the thought of it had a pressure to it. But that time had settled into the past, the way difficult things do when enough ordinary, decent days accumulate on top of them. "I'm not carrying anger anymore," he said. "I want you to know that. Not because of anything you did or didn't do, because it doesn't serve Nora, and she's the only thing that matters to me in this." Silvana nodded. Her jaw was tight. "How is she?" "She's wonderful. She had a hat trick last Saturday." A brief silence. "That's good," Silvana said. "That's really good." He looked at her for one more moment with the clear, settled expression of a man who has made his peace with something and is no longer required to keep making it. "Take care of yourself," he said, and he meant it without reservation. Nora appeared at his elbow with a loaf of sourdough pressed against her chest, and an expression that indicated she had made her selection, and the matter was concluded. She had not noticed Silvana, or had chosen not to. They walked back toward the market entrance together, Rowan's hand on his daughter's shoulder. That night, after dinner, after the bath, after the formal and non-negotiable ceremony of tucking in 4 stuffed animals, each requiring its own blanket adjustment and a brief individual acknowledgement that it had been seen, Rowan sat on the edge of Nora's bed in the dim light of her nightlight. She was nearly asleep. One small hand rested loosely around 2 of his fingers the way it always had, since the first night he had ever sat beside her bed in this posture, in a different house, in a life that had looked a great deal more settled than it actually was. He sat in the still room for a while after she drifted off. The house settled around him. The familiar small sounds of a home at rest. Lena reading in the other room, the occasional soft turn of a page, the specific creak of the radiator in the corner of Nora's room that announced itself every night at roughly the same time, and which he had checked 3 times and decided to simply accept. The faint sound of snow beginning again outside, ticking softly against the window. He whispered, barely above the level of silence, "You don't know this yet. You won't for a long time. But choosing you, every single morning, from the very first one, is the clearest and best decision I have ever made. Being your father isn't something that happened to me. It's something I do every day on purpose, because there is nowhere else I would rather be." Nora breathed on, deep and steady, entirely held in sleep, her hand loose around his fingers. He sat there a while longer. Outside, the snow came down quiet and even over the rooftops of Westboro, over the frozen canal, over the whole patient city, indifferent to the hour and the season and everything that had happened in the months that had brought this particular man to this particular room, sitting in the dark with his daughter's hand in his, entirely at peace with every choice that had led him here.